Hi, everyone. Welcome to Azure User Group Sweden. And welcome back, Håkan. I'm so happy to see you again today. And welcome to our audience watching us live today. Thank you for spending time with us this weekend. How are you, Håkan?
Yeah, pretty good here, Jonah, and I'm really excited here to learn more from our speaker here, Christina, in a short
Yes.
while.
Yes, it's that's great. And before we start, should we introduce ourselves to everyone, Håkan? I
Yes.
can introduce you. Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of long bio, but I'll just speak from the heart. So here with me today is Håkan Silvernagel. He is Microsoft MVP for AI, and he's also very active in the community as a community leader and organizer of .NET user group Oslo in Norway, and also the AI 42 and active in the AI community in Norway. And of course, he's a public speaker and Microsoft certified trainer, and he works for Miles as an AI manager and also big data technology. So yeah, it's an honor to have Håkan with me today.
Yes, thank you, Jonah. So I want to introduce Jonah. So Jonah Anderson is working as a software engineer at Forefront Consulting, and she's also an Azure MVP, a Microsoft certified trainer, an international speaker, a mentor, and also an author. So she will soon come out with her first book.
Thank you, Håkan. Yes, so glad that we can introduce ourselves, especially those that are new today in our session. So welcome. So before I we go ahead and introduce our speaker, let me just show everyone our code of conduct. So Azure User Group Sweden follows the code of conduct, and we are asking everyone to be nice and friendly. I'll listen with purpose and be thoughtful, be respectful to others, seek to understand and not criticize, be curious and open to share your ideas, and be inclusive and respectful in your comments and questions. And if you think that you have some feedback or questions regarding this code of conduct, feel free to contact me and Håkan about this. All right. What else do we have, Håkan, for our audience? I believe
Yeah, we
we
could.
also have Azure Heroes and Fika.
Yes. Yes, I could say a couple of words here about the Fika thing here. So after the session is finished, we would like to spend some time or give you the opportunity to spend some time with our speaker and us and discuss, what we have talked about. Maybe have some questions that you want to that you want to ask our speaker. So that's a good opportunity. So we'll show you that in the end of the session, a link so you can connect.
Yes, that's right. And also, we would like to share with you the learner badger for Azure Heroes uh, as uh, as as a token of your appreciation for joining us today. All right, let's. I'm excited to bring our guest speaker today, Håkan.
Yes. Hello, Christina. How are you?
Hello. I'm great. Thank you. Really excited. I hope you're doing great as well.
Yes.
Yeah, we're great. We're great. It's weekend and we're back.
Yeah.
Yes, and I really like your background and the look. And yes,
Thanks.
yes,
Likewise.
welcome.
So let me have a more formal introduction here to our speaker, Christina. So Christina Dewatchko, she's a lead software architect at Tieto Evry Norway, and she's also a board member at the Norwegian.net user group in Oslo. And she's in love with coding, tech, cyber, sustainability, and animal welfare. And as of recently, she's also a new Microsoft Azure MVP. So congratulations on that, Christina.
Thank
Congrats.
you. Thank you. Very
Yes.
fresh.
Yes, three MVPs on the show, on live on the show, the power of three, as you said
Yay.
earlier. Yes, and we also actually have MVPs and like friends in the community saying hi, like Stas. I know that he used to be our speaker. Hi,
Yeah.
Stas. then we also have another new community member, Nico, is saying hi to all of us, and a lot of us saying good morning.
So great to
Hi from
see
India,
everyone.
and Ashish also. Hi Ashish. He
Yeah.
is our next speaker coming. So our community members are speaking with us, and also saying hi, and also saying hi to you, Christina. He's
So
excited, and
great.
Simon also saying smiley and
Yeah.
celeb. All
This
right.
is so
Yes.
awesome.
Yeah. Okay. Are you ready?
Yeah, I hope so. Let's hope demo gods are ready as well. So
Yes.
You
Do
you
you
only
do
need
you
to
want to?
share your screen here,
Yeah,
Christina.
that's right.
yes, just
Yes.
give me 1 second and I will share my screen. I
Okay,
hope you can
let's
see my presentation in a
see.
second.
Yes.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
Yes.
looks good. Yeah, so yeah, that's great. So yeah,
then we start.
let's
Good luck.
start.
Yay!
Good luck.
So,
Yeah.
really exciting topic today, and I hope that you will find something useful in this session for you as well. So, let's talk about how we can deploy microservices to Azure Kubernetes Service with Azure DevOps Environments and multi-staged Azure pipelines. But before we kick it off, I know thanks for Jonah and Håkan who presented me, but just a few words apart from me being a fresh MVP in Microsoft Azure and working as a software architect, I am also really passionate about contributing back to the tech community by sharing my knowledge on my tech blog, by volunteering in tech community, and I recently started also contributing as a speaker. So this is actually one of my first sessions outside of work as a speaker in the tech community. So I'm super psyched about this, and I hope everything goes smoothly and you will find this session interesting. And I also contribute to open source projects. So what I love focusing on is cloud native application development with security and sustainability in mind. And I also love spreading love for cats. So there will be a few cats sneaking in this presentation. So embrace yourself for this. And I am a Potterhead. I have 3 cats myself, and in my spare time, I love to go on hikes, to puzzle, and I'm a retro games fan. So if you haven't seen this game before that you can see on the right bottom of the screen, not to worry, I don't think it has been so very popular in its days of fame, but it's Gao the Kangaroo. It's like from the beginning of 2000, and I still love playing it. It fell into my heart, and I can say it's kind of retro. So yeah, now let's go to the topic of the day. Why are we here, and why are we going to talk about Azure DevOps environments? Well, the current state of things is that there are tens or maybe even hundreds by now ways you can deploy your applications, your microservices to Kubernetes. But there are so many different use cases, so many organizations, and so many requirements out there that choosing the deployment tool with the amount of tools available and also based on your requirements can get really tough. And it can be influenced by a subset of factors. It can be influenced by how many microservices, how many applications do you want to deploy, how complex are they, how many do you have now, and how many are you going to have long term. Are these applications stateful or stateless? What are the security requirements in your organization? For instance, if you want to introduce a new tool, what do you need to go through in order to be able to get this tool implemented as part of your development lifecycle? Also, you need to think about organizational readiness. If you want to introduce a more complicated tool or a new tool, what will it require from others, not only you, but others who may need to manage that tool as well? How many resources do you have available? And what is the general competence in Kubernetes, in kind of the deployment of your applications to cloud? What is the general competence in your team and your organization? And there may be so many more factors you need to consider when choosing a deployment tool. And therefore, today, I would like to go through and show you an alternative where you can utilize and additional capabilities of the software that you already are using for other purposes as part of your development lifecycle. So if you are using Azure DevOps already, this may just be an opportunity for you to explore an additional functionality that is available for you there out of the box, which is Azure DevOps Environments and Azure Pipelines. So what are Azure DevOps environments? What an Azure DevOps environment basically is, it is a deployment location. It is a place, a target where you will be deploying your applications, your microservices to. It may be Azure Kubernetes Service Cluster, or it may be any other Kubernetes distribution, but it can also be a virtual machine. So if you have use cases where you, for instance, have VMs that you want to deploy applications and host applications on, you can also target VMs as part of an Azure DevOps environment. But today we will focus on the Kubernetes targets, of course, and specifically AKS targets. And since Azure DevOps environment in itself is a location, it also consists of something called resources. And every resource represents an application that will be running on that location. So let's say if you have 5 microservices, each of them will be a separate resource that will be running on an Azure DevOps environment that represents an AKS cluster where these applications will run. And Azure DevOps environment and respective resources can also be implemented quite easily and straightforward as deployment targets as part of deployment stage in Azure Pipelines, which we will see in a moment. So why would you want to use Azure DevOps environments? As I said, there may be multiple factors, but I would like to highlight a few interesting or important reasons that you should consider. And the first reason is that you have a possibility to use a single tool for development and deployment, which makes it really easy, not only for you, but for your teams. Maybe until you mature, you get to a more advanced usage of Kubernetes, you build a more mature technical platform, especially in the beginning. It can be really great and helpful to have a single tool that you're familiar with, that you could also use to deploy your applications to AKS. And for instance, if you need to involve developers to debug issues, then they don't need to learn a new tool, to understand how it works, and things like that. And it kind of also goes naturally in reason number 2, which is a familiar UI. So you already know Azure DevOps, you know a lot of functionality in it, and therefore you don't need to learn any new UI. You don't need to get adjusted and try to make this your routine to use a new tool. Another reason can be that this Azure DevOps environments provide you a user-friendly and straightforward possibility to gather initial diagnostic about the state of your deployments. So let's say if something goes wrong, you and developers might need to, understand kubectl. What is that? How do you install it? How do you use it? How do you connect to an AKS cluster? Which commands do you need to run? So developers, in order to just gather some logs from the application, they need to know quite a lot of stuff around it, a lot about the infrastructure, about the Kubernetes itself. And, developers want to minimize their effort. They want to just sit there in peace and develop their application. So this can actually make it easier because they can utilize the same UI they use for development to gather initial information about the application, to extract logs and to identify some errors in the application straight away without even needing to use kubectl. And finally, another reason is that you can utilize the security capabilities, the RBAC, the role-based access control that already is available and set up for you in Azure DevOps globally for your organization and for repos, for pipelines. You could utilize the same users, user groups, pipeline permissions to to protect who gets access to Azure DevOps environments, who is allowed to do what. And if you need to introduce a new tool, for instance, you might need to go through multiple layers of audit, through bureaucracy. You need to understand how you're going to maintain it, to update it, to protect it, to patch it, because normally it's not like you installed a single version and you're done. It's a new tool, it's a new third-party dependency, it's a new object that is added to your supply chain, and it will require it will add some complexity, at least in the beginning, and in the long term, it will require some effort to maintain. But here you have gone through it already. You have a tool up and running where you can reuse some functionality to protect your resources, which can be really helpful in some cases. And it really helped us in our organization. We actually started with an external tool for this purpose, but we ended up in migrating all of our workloads to Azure DevOps environments and have been using it for a while now, and it works pretty well for our use case. So yes. A few quick highlights before we move to the most exciting part of this session. What do Azure DevOps environments provide for you? Once you deploy an application to AKS with help of Azure DevOps environments, you get information about the deployment history for every application deployed to this environment. You may go and check the work items, the change sets, which deployment failed, which changes were included into that failed deployment. You can trace back the issues back to the beginning from where it started, which will spare you some time to understand what might have gone wrong. You have possibility to set access control, both in terms of who accesses these environments, which users, user groups, but also which pipelines will be allowed to use and target that specific environment. You can use additional environment policies and checks to secure your deployments if you're not ready for continuous deployment, which means that you have all automated checks without human intervention for the whole deployment flow. But if you are not ready for that yet, you can also use not only automated checks that you can implement with help of it, but also like specific approvals, specific people or specific groups that should approve, for instance, deployment to production. You can do that with this functionality. And as I also mentioned, you get possibility to gather logs, get some initial overview, definition of your resources running in AKS. And you also, what you can see in the screenshot below here, you get a separate tab, a inbuilt pipeline execution overview, which shows you which resources were deployed as part of this build pipeline to which environments, and then you can navigate to that specific environment directly from your build pipeline. But talk is talk, theory is theory. It's really great, but I always think that it's important to demo, and that's why I have prepared an interesting. I think it's interesting, so I hope you'll like it as well. I've prepared a scenario that we'll use to go through the whole flow and see how it works. So I have an application. I have an exciting application. Since I said I am a cat fan, I have created an application that I want to get out there to AKS and make it publicly available for all the cat enthusiasts out there, that they can use it and spread love for cats on a global scale. This application is stateless. This will be my small microservice just for demo purposes. It's always simple for demos in such cases, but it's a simple .NET 6 web application, nothing super difficult here. You can see on the left-hand side, we have a Docker file that will package my app into a container. And in order to deploy it to Kubernetes, I have created a Helm chart for it. So we can take a look at the deployment. Let's see here. I have also defined some probes, which will health probes, which will also ensure that our application is up and running properly before we can access it. So let's just verify and understand, get our baseline straight, understand how it looks like. So let's attempt to run it locally with .NET Run, just to see how it looks like, because we'll also see it in a GIF in AKS. So this application is a cat encyclopedia, super simple. It will on every access generate a random cat fact of the day and a random cat image. So if I, for instance, refresh it, it will generate something new for me. And for especially magical people, you can also spread additional love by clicking on this button here, and then it will spread even more cat love for you along the way. So far, so good. Works locally on my machine. Let's take a look at how it will look like when we deploy it to AKS. Due to the time restrictions, I needed to cheat in order to make the application available for us quickly. So I have already deployed it for the first time, but I will show you anyway how you would start when you have not deployed it yet. So let's take a look at how we would start by creating an Azure DevOps environment. So as you can see here, I have one already where I have deployed it, but if you didn't have one, you would typically go to the pipeline section in Azure DevOps and to the environments tab here, and then you would click on new environment. And here comes an important point on the naming conventions. You need to think about that others will also be accessing this environment at some point. So you need to have some kind of a grouping, clean structure that would let others who need to investigate, locate the proper resource, proper environment easily to also properly name your environment and provide a good description for it. So my recommendation would be the way we have been using it is that our name consists of 3 parts. The first one represents the target, which is the Kubernetes distribution in this case, which would be AKS. And then you provide a unique ID for that specific cluster. So if we take a look here in Azure Portal, I have 2 clusters here, which I'm going to use in this demo. I will use AKS 1233. So I would use 1233 as the ID. And finally, I would use dev to represent the environment type that we're deploying to, which in this case will be development, or it will be prod for production or staging for staging and so on. And then you need to provide a description. That will say like what kind of environment this is and what kind of resources will be deployed there. And then you can choose the type or not choose it if you want to add resources later. But if you choose a type, you would need to add your first resource straight away. So I would choose Kubernetes. And then every resource it gets the name based on the namespace that you will use to deploy your applications to. So what it will do now, it will populate. You could choose another. Generic provider means that if you don't want to use AKS, you could use another Kubernetes distribution. And then I could choose the Azure subscription, and it will populate the clusters here. And you could either choose an existing namespace if you pre-created it. So since I have an app already running, I have pre-created it, but you can also provide a new name, and then Azure DevOps will create a namespace in that AKS cluster for you. And let's say test. And once you would do that, you would click validate, and then it will create or validate your namespace, check that everything looks good, and create a service connection for you, which will allow Azure DevOps to actually deploy things to an AKS cluster. And once you click validate and create, it will pop up here, just as you can see in the existing environment, and it will generate your first resource here. And service connection is important in this case. So let's take a look at what happened once I created this Azure DevOps environment. AKS 1233 dev. Let's go to service connections here in Azure DevOps. We can see that Azure DevOps created a service connection for me of type Kubernetes automatically for AKS 1233 dev Azure DevOps environment, targeting AKS 1233 cluster and targeting a specific namespace, which in this case is Cat Encyclopedia, which means that there comes the security part of it. It creates a permission for the specific resource that you create that is only limited to that namespace. So I will actually show you a kubectl command now, but as I said in the description, your developers would not need to use it. But for demo purposes, I would like just to show you what this actually means. So if we take a look, I am connected to my cluster now. If we shall we see, if we take a look at our deployment or at the pods running encyclopedia, We can see that we have one pod running here. So far, so good. Let's take a look at the service accounts. So if I say kubectl get service account in namespace get encyclopedia, what I will get here is there are some service accounts that are created by default for me, but there is one that is specific for Azure DevOps that was created based on the service connection you have seen. That is namespaced to my application. And if I take a look at the role binding here, so those who don't have much knowledge about Kubernetes, bear with me. If we take a look at the role binding here, what is the difference between cluster role and role binding? So cluster role bindings provide permissions that are affecting the whole cluster, but role binding provides permissions to a specific service account in a specific namespace. So as you can see here, the Azure DevOps created cluster admin permissions for service account DA664, which we saw here, with admin permissions on Cat Encyclopedia namespace, which means that this specific resource, Azure DevOps, is allowed to perform actions only in this specific namespace and not outside of it. So if you have any other apps running, it will not be allowed to do that since it's namespace to this specific namespace. So once we took a look at this, we created a new environment and we have our first resource, our target, up and running. Before we actually take a look at how do we deploy from here, I just want to mention one more thing. And this goes about the namespace conflicts and the way you are grouping your resources in Azure DevOps. Actually, what is interesting is that Azure DevOps allows you to mix and match your resources targeting different clusters as part of a single Azure DevOps environment. But the problem here is that you need to be really careful about it because you may end up in having namespace conflicts. So if I were to deploy my Cat Encyclopedia to one more cluster as well, and I don't want to create a separate environment for it, I don't want to create a new namespace for it, I just want to use the same environment, what will happen then? If I try to add one more resource here, let's see, but I want to target my other cluster, 1234. And then I would say that I still want to use the same name, the same namespace. I want it to be consistent. What will happen now is that I will actually not be allowed to do that, because even though it will create a namespace for me right now in my cluster 1234, I will actually not be allowed in Azure DevOps itself to create a resource, because it counts this. It has this unique this requirement of having a unique namespace independent of which cluster it targets. So we found this out the hard way. I haven't seen it in any documentation. If you have, please add a comment about that. But I haven't seen it being documented by Microsoft, actually. So you need to be aware of that, and which means that if you want to mix and match, I would not recommend it. Also, to have it clean and consistent, in my head, an Azure DevOps environment should represent a single location, which makes it more understandable for everyone else trying to check and locate things externally. But another consequence is that you will then need to ensure that you are providing unique namespaces independent of which cluster you target. So moving on, now we have created our Azure DevOps environment and a resource that will represent our application. Now we are ready to target it and deploy our app with Azure Pipelines. So if I go to my repo here in Azure DevOps, I have the same source code here as you have seen in Visual Studio Code. So let's open the pipeline file. What is important here? As you can see, it's a multi-staged pipeline. It's both for being available to have checks, to have proper order of things. In this case, I would recommend to create different stages. You may have additional stages apart from building an application. You can also have stage for running auto tests, for running security checks before you reach the deployment stage. So it's a very nice capability to use multi-staged pipelines. So I have a separate stage here for building my app. Nothing, no science, no advanced science here. It just runs .NET Build, publishes an app, builds, packages it in a container image, and packages a Helm chart for me, which I, to make it easy, it will just publish my package and publish my Helm chart, and I'll just download it, this artifact, in my deployment stage. So when we go to the deployment stage, this one we can ignore for now, which deploys WordPress. We will see later why I have created it. So it's disabled for now here. If we go to the deployment stage for my app, here a few important things is that it depends on the build stage, which means we don't attempt to deploy our application before we actually have built and packaged it properly. And then we go to the jobs section. And what is interesting here is that it's using a specific job type. It's not a regular job, which you have seen here in the build stage, where you just saw job. It's actually a specific job type called deployment, which allows us to provide an additional property, which will let Azure Pipelines know, hey, I need to use an Azure DevOps environment to deploy this app here. And initially, the easiest way to provide a target for an Azure DevOps environment is you just hard code it. You say the name of the Azure DevOps environment dot, and then the name of your resource that you will deploy to. But what I recommend is to actually use a variable that is stored in a variable group. If we go here to the library, we can see that I have a variable group for Azure DevOps environments, where you can have multiple variables, one representing development if you have a single environment, or multiple dev environments, and production. And why I want to use that, and the reason for this is that if you need at some point to move your workloads, if something changes, you would need to move them to a new Azure DevOps environment, then you would need to go and locate every single pipeline you are deploying to and change this hard-coded value to something else. A lot of clicks. You don't want that, probably. I wouldn't want that. But if you have it stored in a library, in a variable group, then you just need to update it one place here, and that's it. Everyone will pick it up. And you can reference it here, just as any other variable you would use in Azure Pipelines. And you can also use this as a variable as well. You could reference it as well. But an important part here, if you are using a variable group, you need also to ensure that you import it in the top level of your pipeline, because Azure Pipelines needs to populate it during the compilation stage. And if you only add it to that specific stage, it will not be able to do that. So you would need to use the top level of your pipeline to actually import it. And that's it. Once you have provided the property with your environment, it will know where it needs to do it. So when you run, in my case, a Helm deploy task, which will run a Helm install or Helm upgrade, it will just automatically connect it to the Azure DevOps environment and the respective resource that you have chosen. So since I had to kind of spare some time, we can go to the last pipeline execution here and go to the deploy dev stage and take a look at deploy cat encyclopedia. And as you can see, it was deployed to this public URL. So if I try to access it now, I can actually see that now it's publicly available for everyone to spread love, to read more about cats, to enjoy my cat encyclopedia. And this is really great. So now it's up and running. And what do we actually get to see once it's up and running? Through Azure, directly from Azure DevOps. As I mentioned, here you get a new tab, which is environments. So if we go to that one, we can see what has been deployed to which environment, to which resources those were. So if you are deploying to multiple environments, let's say if you have an additional production stage, you would get multiple sections here. You will get a new section for a production cluster, for instance. And if you have multiple multiple applications that you're deploying as part of the same pipeline to the same Azure DevOps environment, you will also get multiple entries here under jobs. And then from here, you can also easily go to that specific environment and you are in. So we are basically here in this environment section. So what do we get to see from here? As I mentioned, you get to see deployment history. So if we go to deployments, we can see that I can see all the history. If you have multiple applications, you will also get a history of all deployments for all the apps in that environment. You can filter then based on the resource to kind of, if you need to check a specific application, specific microservice, you can just filter for that resource here to get logs only for that one. And then I can go into each and every one of those and I can take a look at the jobs. I can take a look at the changes associated with it, who did the change, and if any work items were connected to it. In this case, there weren't because I'm all by myself in this Azure DevOps instance. But it gets, if you need to debug, to analyze something, you will get a possibility to do that directly, or to change, to track the changes directly from this deployment section. And if we go back to the resource itself, I think you can also, if you in some cases actually decide to mix and match, and you have resources targeting a virtual machine, you can also filter it here, and you can filter on the status. So if you have a resource that has the latest status as failed, you can kind of filter it here to get quick access to it. So if we go to Cat Encyclopedia resource representing my application, from here I also get some possibilities. I can see my deployment. So if I have multiple pods, I will be able to see it here. I can see which container image it is currently using, and I get to see also some labels here, like that it is managed by Helm, which version it has, and which Helm chart version it is using, which also may help here as well. In case you have some daemon sets, stateful sets that you have deployed as part of your microservice in that cluster, in that environment, you can also filter on that here. But here I have only a deployment, which, for those of you who don't know, a deployment, this is a Kubernetes resource which abstracts or represents a collection of pods that represent your application. Also, another interesting thing, if we go to services, we get also information about which services are exposing my pods. So a service, since pods can die at any minute, they can get destroyed. You cannot bind yourself to the pod IP. And service in this case comes in and is able to abstract this so that all the requests hitting your AKS cluster that want to reach your app, this will make it easier to route the requests to a specific service, and the pods in the background can die and be exchanged and whatever. So you can also get some information about the service that your application pods are exposed on. You can get information about the cluster IP, the selectors, the labels, if there is any session affinity, which port, and you can from here also navigate back to the workload or to your deployment, to your pods. And if we take a look as well back to the services, you can, if you have multiple service types, in this case I have only cluster IP type of a service, you could also filter it here. And I also mentioned that it's possible to get information about the logs. So if we go back, let's see, now I was maybe too fast. In the workload section, if I click on my deployment and click on one of the pods, I can get some overview about my pod, its status, what conditions it needs to be marked as healthy, which image it's using, which node it's running on, and when it was created. And if I go to logs, I can be able to retrieve the logs of the application as well. So one thing to mention, it's not streaming live. You actually need to refresh to get the latest logs populated here for you. But you get at least your logs directly in Azure DevOps UI. And then you can go to YAML section to get some information about the current definition of your resources running in your AKS cluster. So here is the pod definition where you can take a look at some metadata, managed fields, the latest events for the pod, see if there are any volumes it's using, what is defined here, which health probes, and so on and so forth. So you can get it directly from here, which you would normally use when you want to go to kubectl and do kubectl describe pod, for instance. But I still want to do to show you one thing so that you can also see it live. And for that, I would actually want to do some damage to show you what happens if the deployment actually goes wrong. So now I have a good health probe configured here for my app, which means that it's using the proper health probe to identify if the pod is healthy. So let's do some damage. Let's change this one to a bad health probe to simulate an error in our app. So I will change it to a specific endpoint that I have created to simulate this situation. So I will change it to bad health. I think that's the one. Just give me a second. I'll double check that I'm using the correct bad health. Yes. And let's commit this change. And made some damage. And let's connect it to a specific bug that I created for this specific use case. Once we commit, I am committing without pull requests. Of course, don't do it in real life. But for this specific purpose, I'm just doing damage directly on the master branch. So let's run our app. Once we have done that, we will take a look at what will happen. And while it's building, it will take under a minute. I just want to share a useful tip with you. As you have seen, I have publicly exposed my application. And in a real life scenario, or for you would typically do that by creating an ingress controller, by setting up DNS zone, ensuring that everything is up and running. But AKS has actually a very useful add-on that you could use that will do all of it for you. So when you are doing some stuff in development or testing and you need to do it quickly on a dev cluster you set up just for yourself, you could use an add-on called HTTP application routing. And this add-on basically provides you an opportunity. It will create everything for you. It will set up a DNS zone for you, and for every new application you want to expose, it will create a DNS entry for you automatically and expose it on a public URL that is specific for that AKS cluster. And the only thing you would need to do in that case is that you would need to tell AKS that, hey, I am using, so in the ingress section of, for the ingress resource for your application, you would just need to provide an ingress class annotation saying that you want to use HTTP application routing add-on. And then you would need to let it know which host it should expose it on, and the DNS zone, provide the DNS zone that it created for you for your cluster. And that's it. And it will automatically expose it for you. As I said, just for development, it's not for production, but it really allows you to do it really quickly. So if we go back here, and also I would, let's see, I will also show you how we can watch what's happening here in real life, again with kubectl, just for the demo purposes. Let's get our pods and let's watch in real time what's happening. So as you can see, we have the old one that is still up and running, which is really awesome. With Helm, rolling upgrade is happening automatically, which means we are still able to access our application here, even though we saw that the other the new pod with the new version is actually have already restarted. Yeah, you see, it just keeps on restarting, which is not a good sign. So if we go back to it has a 2 minutes timeout, but we already now can see that something is happening in Azure DevOps environments. So if we go let's see, if we go here to the deployment, No, sorry, I used the wrong, navigated the wrong here. From Resources tab, we can see that it is already marked as not ready, and we can go into it. Oh, I forgot to update the version, so it just overwrote this one. But that's how it is during demo. You forget details, but you can go and to this pod already now without needing to get any kubectl logs or anything. You can see can take a look at what's happening. You see it's marked as unready. You can see that it's marked, it's set to false. The containers are not ready. And if we go to the logs, we can actually see here, let's see if I can, boom, I have some application errors in here, which tell me that something really terrible happened. It can't load cats and we really need to check our health probes. So right, so now we can actually see that something went really wrong. And if we go back to the deployments here and take a look at the changes, we can see what happened here. I made some damage. So this is probably a red flag, definitely a red flag based on the bug that it was connected to. So it will allow me to gather some initial information about my app and make it right again. So let's see. Now it went actually in a crash loop back off after it had tried to restart multiple times. Now, let's try to fix it and also add some additional policies to ensure that, we prevent this situation from happening again. And here I would like to show you another a capability that I also mentioned in Azure DevOps Environments, where you can add additional checks, additional approvals and checks. But before we do that, one minor thing as well, when I mentioned security, you can actually also set role-based access control, both for the users and user groups and also for pipelines. So if you can both set it for the environments page as a whole to identify who has access to this environments page in Azure DevOps, you can configure it here. But you can also go to a specific environment, go to security, and here you are able to define which role, which group, which user has on that specific location, on that specific cluster, on that specific Azure DevOps environment. And here you can see also a separate section for pipeline permissions. And currently I have only one pipeline, but if I had multiple, I would be able to add them by if I need it, or I can open access for all of them, which you probably don't want to do. So, but on the environment as a whole, on that location as a whole, you can also add some additional approvals and checks. And there is a collection of default approvals and checks available for you. And today I will show you two of them. I will show you the check for approvals, which means that before we do deployment, we need to, specific users will need to approve it. Since I'm all by myself, I will kind of simulate the situation and just add myself as an improver. You could have some instructions here that can be as a checklist for those reviewing the deployment. And you can say if you allow approvals to approve their own runs or not. I need to, since I'm all by myself, but typically you wouldn't want that. And timeout 2 days. If no one reviewed it in 2 days, it will just time out. So we'll add this one. I will not go through all the checks due to the time limitations, so I will just quickly show you the second one as well, which is an exclusive lock. And in this case, what it basically means is that if you have two deployment stages or two deployment jobs that are trying to target the same environment at the same time, only the latest will run and the previous one will get cancelled. In some cases, it may make sense if you are moving your resources, you might not want anybody to run deployment for those resources in between, and then you can actually use this exclusive lock, and then it explains that only the latest stage will run. And once again, I'll set timeout to 2 days. And let's go back and fix the damage we have done. So if I go back to the health probes I have defined here in the deployment and get it back to normal again, let's change it back to OK. Fixing health probes. Let's connect it back to this user story. And to show you, to simulate the situation where exclusive lock will trigger as well, let's enable the other stage, which also will attempt to run in parallel with deployment of our Cat Encyclopedia app. It will try to deploy WordPress. Simple WordPress Helm chart, so nothing difficult here. It will just install the Helm chart for WordPress and attempt to deploy it to that environment. You can actually also just target a specific environment, and it will attempt to create a resource for you. Let's see. Let's also add a descriptive comment: deploy WordPress. All right. Then we are good to go. Let's trigger our pipeline again, just to ensure that our Helm upgrade didn't go in a deadlock. Let's take a look at Helm history for our Cat Encyclopedia release in namespace Cat Encyclopedia. We can see that now it actually failed. The release we wanted to do, release number 6, it actually failed. So now we are good to go. So let's quickly run our pipeline. I'm getting really pressed on the time here, but this will be the last demo I wanted to show you. Now it will just need a second to warm up. And we can also actually take a look at, let's see, at the deployment live. Get pods, Cat Encyclopedia. Let's watch live what will happen. Yes, I think we just need a few more seconds. And I will take a look at my cheat sheet to ensure that I haven't forgot to mention any important things to you. No, that should be good. Let's see here. Yes, and now we're getting closer to the interesting part, because now the approvals should and our validations should kick in. So now we should get a pop-up here in a second. Come on. There you go. 2 approvals need to be reviewed. So let's take a look at what's happening here. What I would need is that I would need to approve this, since we have defined an approval check that we can see here. You can add a comment while approving, and you can also reject it. So if I approve it for now, it will approve it for both automatically. And then if you now we're getting back to the no, sorry. No, it will actually just approve for the first one. And then let's try the second one. And what will happen now? Let's see. Maybe my demo. Let's see here. View. Oh, no. Yeah. It's a bit hard to simulate this this request, actually, this exclusive lock. So I wasn't very lucky this time, looks like. But typically it should. Let's see. Yeah, sorry about that. But typically what will happen is that the one will get cancelled because if I have simulated the deployment of WordPress to start first, and then you would approve the deployment for Cat Encyclopedia, then it will cancel the WordPress one due to both stages attempting to deploy to the same place. But due to time, I will not try to attempt it once again. But you could play around it with yourself as well. I think think there are very few cases. We haven't used it, so I just wanted to try it out for this demo. And I got it working yesterday, but not today. So that's how it is sometimes. But that's basically what I wanted to show you as part of this demo. This is kind of the information you can you get to see. And if we go back to the logs as well, we can see that the initial one got cleaned up, that went in a crash loop backoff, and the previous pod that was running got terminated, and we created a new pod as well. So if we take a look at the pods, now we have the pod here running. Shall we see? Now, finally, I've gone through my demo. If we take a look at the final considerations for Azure DevOps environments, what I would recommend you to think about: naming convention for the Azure DevOps environments. Do think about that others may be looking into those environments, trying to locate, debug the errors and issues that may happen in the application. So do use naming convention wisely. Also think about grouping, how you will be grouping resources across Azure DevOps environments to avoid namespace conflicts, but also to make it cleaner. Also think about how you would reference Azure DevOps environments across pipelines and pipeline stages. So I recommend using a variable group instead of hard coding it, because you will then avoid the amount of manual clicks and update it in one place. If you need additional checks that you would need to define for your pipeline, do utilize the functionality that is there in Azure DevOps environments for approvals and checks. And also think about how you would migrate the resources running in a specific Azure DevOps environment to a new one. In case you want to migrate your workloads to a new cluster, you would need to create it from the UI manually, create an environment first, then create resources for every application you want to migrate. But I would recommend to automate it. There is a REST API from Azure DevOps that is available for you to do that. And I have also created a PowerShell script that we are using for this purpose that will do this automatically for me. And an important point here is, of course, if you have a stateful application or if you have a more advanced use case, you still need to do some preparations before you do the migration. So this environment, it represents the kind of the metadata of your application, and then it's the pipeline itself that does execute the deployment. So if you need to do some specific things before you actually deploy to a new cluster, you would need to do that before you migrate to a new environment. Finally, some of the resources that I have collected for you is I have a blog post series on this that goes into more detail on naming conventions and grouping recommendations for Azure DevOps environments, and also goes into a kind of more lightweight demo than the one we saw today. And there is also a link to that script that will automate the migration of the resources to a new environment. And Microsoft has a separate section on Azure DevOps environments and resources. And also you can read there more about how to use other Kubernetes distributions as an environment and virtual machines. And it's hard, it's long URLs. So for this purpose, I created a QR code. So please use that one, and then you will be taken straight to my GitHub repo where all this information resides. And if you have any questions, just let's chat about it. You can check out my tech blog at christhecodingunicorn.com, and I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and you can find other resources that I have created for the community also on my GitHub at Guide Me to the Moon. So I think that was it. Thank you so much. I hope you found some useful information for yourself as well. And yeah, let me stop the screen sharing here. Do let me know if you have any questions. And yeah, thank you so much. I think that was what I wanted to show today.
Yes.
A bit over time. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
I really tried to shorten it.
No problem. Yes, it was a good inception you did there.
Yeah, that's a bit. That's how it is
Yes.
sharing from the web.
Yes. Thank you for the great presentation. I think I learned a lot from this, and I hope our audience have learned a lot as well from your live coding and demo. So thank you so much for that. Let me see. We do have some feedback or questions. So let's take, are you ready to take questions now,
Yeah,
Christina? Yeah, sure.
yeah, sure.
Let's see. We have a question here. Since we are talking
Yeah,
about deploying, yes, wouldn't it be better to use
yeah.
GitOps?
Of course, it would be better. I know that this is kind of the golden standard when you think about deploying an application to Kubernetes, but we need to remember that the level of maturity in different organizations differs a lot when it comes to adopting cloud native, adopting containers and orchestration, and GitOps requires you to prepare. You can't start with it at once on the organizational scale. As a playground, works perfectly to start with, but once you need to make it stable, once you need to involve others, your team, your developers, it requires a lot in terms of maturity and understanding on how you would maintain it. Is your organization ready to just let it become like a kind of a black box for many, because something is getting upgraded automatically, if things go wrong, it just attempts to maybe automatically sync for you. So it's not given that you are ready yet to start doing GitOps. This can be a something in between. It can let you start. If you have some microservices that you are running, it gives you an opportunity to utilize what you already have while you mature. And then the step from there to adopt GitOps is lower than if you start from the start without necessarily understanding what it will require from you as an organization to make it to make it stable. So yeah, that's why this session gets to see the world.
Yeah, thank you for that. I hope it answered the question of Al Hussein. I hope I could not pronounce the name correctly. Yeah, we also have another question. Do you want to reveal it?
Yes, yes. So we have
Yes.
a question here from Ashish. He says that I use deployment groups for my VMs, and the benefit I get is that I can share it with different projects in Azure DevOps. But I cannot use deployment groups with YAML pipelines, but with releases.
Deployment groups with releases. Not sure about that one, actually. I'm not sure I understand that one.
Maybe we can just take it
But
in
when it
the
comes to
chat.
VMs, yeah, I think maybe when it comes to VMs, that's a bit of a different use case. And then I haven't used the VMs opportunity of Azure DevOps environments. So if that's what you meant, Ashish, that you can't use this if you were to use virtual machine resources, then that may be correct. But just let me know if you have a question regarding it, and I can take a look closer to it and get back to you.
Yes. Yeah, I was showing my dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my Labradoodle dog, Lawrence. His favorite place. Yeah, he's quiet right today, at least. Yeah, thank you for the answer for Ashish's question. We also have another question here from Simon. I think you can read it.
Yeah, if it is
Yes.
possible to use the state from a resource in something like a gate between promotion between environments. That's a very interesting question. I think, let's see. I think there is some possibility because there are some checks that you could work with, that you could customize a bit to see if you can, for instance, this new check that goes about evaluating artifacts. It's still in preview, and I think they will develop it a bit more. And there you can actually customize you can use like a custom template where you can define the rules that will allow this deployment for this specific container image to continue or not. I think it's very, very new. So last I've checked it, it was only available for specific use cases where you actually publish a container image as an artifact that can be consumed by the stage. So maybe you could use that one for further customization when it gets more mature. But as of now, I haven't seen any other possibilities for customization unless you trigger something like an Azure function or a call a REST API that could check it for you, which also are separate controls there that you could play around with. But nothing like natively built and available for you to use for that purpose.
All right. Thank you so much for the answer. I hope it helps Simon or Simon. Okay. And I think we don't have any other questions. Just great appreciation. This is very cool. I love working with Azure Pipelines. Great presentation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's my first one. So sorry about some quirks in the demo. It's like really dry run for you. So I, of course, forgot to update an image version. So that's what happens when you add to deploy or add your changes directly to master branch. Don't do that.
I'm just queuing all the appreciation you get. Like we have from Nico, from Audrey, who is also part of the community and one of our previous speakers. She works with DevOps as well. And yes, and someone said hi to Lawrence.
Yay! It was great to see that he actually joined. I was really wondering if
I wish your 3 cats are there to say hi for real and then do the noise as he said.
Yeah, I kind of protected from that risk by closing the door this time.
Yes, that's good. All right. Thank you so much. So, the time is up, but before we end our session, I want to invite everyone to join us at our after session fika for about 15-20 minutes, where you get a chance to grab something to drink, warm coffee or tea, and then chat with us, especially ask some questions directly with Christina in a casual way via Zoom. So if you have time, feel free to scan this QR code, or you can go to the bit.ly linked Azure Sweden Fika-AKS. And also, don't forget your Azure Learner badges for today's session. Anything else?
I'll need to claim that one afterwards. Learning from myself.
Yes. So how about you? Do we have anything else, Håkan, that I missed?
Maybe mention next session.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, I almost forgot that. I did. Yes, so our next session in 2 weeks, we will be having Ashish with us. I know he is with us live right now. He will be sharing about containers as a development environment. So the link to the session is actually in our meetup page community. So feel free to join us next time, and it will be on September 24th, about the same time, 12 noon time. Yes. All right. So the time went so quick. I know that Christina wanted to demo more, but maybe I will book a one-on-one meeting with you and learn more.
Yeah, I'm happy to help. So if there are any questions, don't hesitate to reach out even after this session.
Yes, that's right. Okay, so see you everyone on our Fika, and I hope everyone great weekend from us.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.